And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Soul Survivor podcast. Ryan and I back to recap Survivor 44, episode 12. Cannot believe we just watched the penultimate episode of the season. It's gone by pretty fast, but we're here. How are you doing, Ryan?
Dylan, I'm doing well. Can't believe we are, as always, once again at the end. It always goes so fast. Just finished eating dinner. I promise I will not be burping in anybody's face tonight. But no, I'm doing good. I got a bit faked out there, but another good episode.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's dive right into it. So Jamie ends up going to tribal council last night, and I have to say, I'll be the first to admit. So the reason why we do the podcast on Thursdays or over the weekend is because I usually am working Wednesday nights. So we can't do the podcast Wednesday night right after like we used to because I have work. So what normally happens is I have to be on social media for work all the time, but I make sure to avoid, like my personal account and stuff because, I literally I literally delete the Our Survivor podcast account from our phone and then log in after the show because I don't want to get like an alert by accident that's like, oh, this happened or this tweet shows up. And then I'm like, oh, I don't want to see that because, I'm watching late at night after I get off work. So last night I happened to be scrolling on Twitter, on my personal Twitter, and I don't have any Survivor stuff on my personal Twitter. I usually do all Survivor stuff from our account.
Mm-hmm.
So for whatever reason, Twitter added this for you section where it optimizes towards what you like. So I guess for some reason it knew that I like Survivor, even though I don't look at Survivor stuff on my personal feed. So, right before I'm about to watch the episode, I'm scrolling on my For You on Twitter, and I see a tweet that says, "We just lost a Survivor legend tonight." And I was like, oh no. I was like, well, how can I see that? Right? How can I see that right before I watch the episode? So now I'm thinking the entire episode, Carolyn's going home because I saw that tweet. And it just so happened that the edit of last night was the Carolyn fake out. So the entire episode, I was fooled because I saw the tweet. I think if I didn't see the tweet, then I would have been like, oh, it's a fake out. It's a fake out. It's a fake out. But I was fooled because I saw that tweet. So the entire episode, I'm like, oh my God, this is like an obvious boot episode that's actually going to be an obvious boot. And I was so upset the whole episode. I'm like, you know what? I'm like, I thought that, I predicted on this podcast on Monday that we were going to get a Jam blindside and it was going to be some like epic move. And I'm like, oh, it's just going to be a simple Carolyn vote. Like, who wants that? And they even started playing the damn music at the end. I was like, oh, it's cooked. It's cooked. She kept making the faces. So Survivor had me fooled. I think by the end of the episode, even if I didn't see the tweet, I think I would have been fooled regardless. So good job by the editors. And personally, I am happy that Carolyn is still in the game and the Tika 3 will be seeing the finale, all three of them.
I mean, I'll be honest. I didn't see any tweet, but I also got completely faked out. And again, look, obviously the whole episode was about Carolyn and whether or not Jam would turn against Tika, vote with the others, and take a shot at Carolyn after her move last week. But basically, I thought, there's a chance she could go, but maybe they're tricking us. And then, like you said, they hit us with the emotional music that they always give to like the big characters or the big blindsides, like your Noels, your Sam, Shans, whatever. And then you have the whole facial expressions where Carolyn, like you could tell she's like, something doesn't feel right. Granted, Jam still voted with her, but he definitely had doubts about voting with her. And she was very keen on picking up on it. So I thought for a bit there she was gone. But then as soon as I saw, because I mean, Carson has like the unique camera. As soon as I saw the vote for Jamie with Carson's letters, I'm like, okay, Jamie's gone. But no, I mean, listen, Jamie gone. I think we both saw her as a potential final 3 GOAT there. But listen, I think it makes sense. If you're Tika and you're heading into the final 5, you need to break up the other strongest alliance in the game, which is Jamie and Lauren, because they're not going to turn against each other. So now you go into a final 5 with a 3-1-1 advantage rather than a 3-2 advantage against Heidi. So I agree. I'm glad Tika stuck together, and we're guaranteed to have at least one Tika in the end.
Yeah, I think here's the thing about this episode is that I think that it was very obviously, And I saw that she was getting a little bit ripped on Reddit and Twitter and stuff. But this was, at least from our perspective, and again, maybe after the season we listen to all the exit interviews and we hear completely different stuff that we've not seen in the show. But based on what we've seen, this should have been the most, and this is the reason I predicted it. This should have been the most obvious use the idol to break up Tika moment of all time. I mean, it's three in terms of Tika to non-Tika, it's 3-3. Heidi has an idol. Nobody knows that Heidi has an idol. So why is Heidi trying to be the fourth with Tika instead of working with Lauren and Jamie to potentially blindside one of the other Tika? I don't know. I think this was the type of thing where like Heidi and Jamie and Lauren were almost on just such opposite sides that it just couldn't be reconciled. Like they couldn't come together. Which again, I would have liked to have seen maybe more of that, because I'm sitting here the whole time like, is this really not an option? That like everyone was talking, maybe Carolyn gets voted out, but like if it would have been in Heidi's best interest if Carolyn's name was being thrown out there to make sure it's one of the Tika, to make sure Carolyn goes home, or to maybe say, you know what, I have this idol. We could pull a fast one on even Jam Jam if we want, or we could pull a fast one on Carson. And there was just nothing. And then the episode ends with her playing an idol for herself, which she got no votes. So there's just, I don't know if this is like, she's gotten the edit of somebody who's like been trying to kind of make a big move the entire season, has never been really able to, and has never been like quite in touch with what's going on. But that was definitely I guess I want to say disappointing part of the episode, where I thought there was potential for a big move. Again, we talk about so much how rare it is these days in Survivor for idols to be out there that nobody knows about, or idols to be in possession, I should say, of somebody that nobody knows about. So to have the situation where there's a clear power trio, and to have the person with the idol just play it for herself, just so she's, guarantees herself to be safe. It's like, well, there's basically no way Heidi can win this game now. So it's tough. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, look, obviously I feel like we can't ever count anybody out. I feel like obviously her winner's equity has gone down a little bit, of course. I think everybody here probably agrees one of Tika will most likely win. And I think it's tough because, she played it on herself and ended up wasting it because it really didn't matter. I agree with you that an optimal move would have been, if you know that Tika's going on Jamie, you can just play the idol on Jamie and you can get Carolyn out. However, we saw earlier in the episode, Heidi apparently, granted, if you hear it in confessionals, it's not a lie. Because obviously Carson was lying to Lauren's face the whole episode. And then in confessionals, he's like, okay, I'm just telling her that, but I'm not going to vote out Carolyn. In confessional, Heidi tells us, the audience. So I actually want to go with Jam Jam and Carolyn. Now, I wonder, why would she want to go with them? She sees Carson as a threat. I do think Carson is a threat. But clearly she didn't make this move tonight because she wants to be there with Carolyn and Jam Jam. So her next two moves are going to be to try to get out Carson, I assume, at 5, and then try to, I guess, eliminate Lauren and Fire, or the other way around. But it's like, I keep thinking, why would she want to go to the end with two people who are likable, strategic, and could be threats to win? The only thing I can think of is like, she sees them as two Tikas where they can maybe split the jury votes. And maybe they get like 1 or 2 votes each, and then there's still 4 or 5 votes for her to claim. And she's like, okay, well, if they split their votes, I can maybe get the rest of the jury and they'll vote for me. Carson, I see, as a big threat. Lauren has a lot of friends on the jury, like Jamie now, like Kane, Brandon. She has a lot of friends. So the safest option is to go with 2 Tika that are a bit kooky, and maybe they'll get like split votes and I can win. So that was probably Heidi's reasoning. I still feel like she should have taken a shot at Tika here, because now if they want to run the table, they can easily do it. But yeah, that was the episode focused on Jam Jam's decision, obviously, and we'll get into that. But Heidi's decision also here was very interesting too.
Yeah, and I could be wrong on this, but I feel like I remember that Heidi said that in her pregame press, I'm pretty sure she said her favorite player was Sandra. So maybe like Heroes Villains is on her mind, and she's thinking that she could be the Sandra in that situation if she goes with 2 Tika. But the issue with that logic is that the Tika aren't disliked like those like Parvati and Russell were in that season, right? So it's not like she's going to the final tribal council where she's going to get votes because everybody dislikes the fact that Tika, like the people that are Tika or that Tika dominated the whole game. Like, no, we've very much clearly seen by pretty much everybody how well liked Carolyn and Carson and Jam Jam are, right? So she's not going to get any votes if she goes, at least I don't think so, if she goes with Tika. So I think that she has a little bit of a flawed logic there. But I want to ask you, if we, like you said, the entire episode focused on Jam Jam's decision in this case.
Mm-hmm.
What did Jam Jam and Carson make the right choice to keep Carolyn in the game?
I think so, because here's the thing. Obviously, Jam Jam, and I disagreed a little bit because when he was like, "Oh, I need to decide whether to emotionally keep Carolyn or be strategic and cut her," I feel like they're both the same thing here. Emotionally and strategically, I think you should and you want to keep Carolyn, because the problem is that the rest of the tribe understands that Tika is a big threat. They've been playing the middle the whole merge. They haven't lost anybody since the pre-merge. And Franny tried to get the troops together and no one took a shot. And now they realize Tika makes up half the final 6. So they realize that one of them could win. They all acknowledge Carson could win. They acknowledge Jam Jam could win. And they acknowledge Carolyn is now underestimated and she could win. If you are Jam Jam and you take out Carolyn here because you're scared she's going to make it to the end and win. And by the way, the only way she gets there is if she... Listen, anybody can win on any given Sunday, but I don't think Carolyn's winning immunity at 5 or 4. And I think a weird scenario would need to happen where she beats someone in fire, unless somebody just does not know how to make fire there. So when Jam Jam says to Carson, "I'm scared she'll get there and win," I don't know how she gets there like as dominantly as Jam Jam thinks. But additionally, like I was saying, if you are Jam Jam and you take Carolyn out, you now go into the final 5 at a 3-2 disadvantage. It would be super easy for Heidi, Jamie, and Lauren to say, "Oh, perfect. Let's just take out Carson and Jam Jam now. They can't do a single thing against us." Because of final 5, you could even do like a 2-2-1 split and they can't stop you. So like Carolyn was saying, at the very least, Tika has to stick together for the final 6 votes. At 5, I guarantee you they're going to take a swing at each other. But like you have to stick together at 6. So I think they made the right choice to stick together here.
Yeah, I think if Jam Jam had voted out Carolyn, he was right up next, right? He was done at final 5 if he didn't win immunity. They needed the Tika to stick together for one more vote, and this way you at least guarantee that you can't be outmatched in terms of the numbers come final 5. Even though again, it seems like Heidi's with them, but honestly, you can never trust that, because if they had voted out Carolyn and then Heidi says, "You know what? I didn't make a move at the final 6, but now is my time to strike." And like, I'm going to be getting credit for getting out the biggest threat in this game by voting out Jam Jam. And then all of a sudden Carson loses in fire. And now Heidi's sitting there with Lauren and Jamie at the end. So I think that to optimize everybody's on Tika's best chance to get to the end and to win, that was the right move, to stick all three for all three to stick together. But like you said, final 5, all bets are off. I think that there is a chance that they start swinging at each other there. Now, you mentioned a situation that I think they actually touched on yesterday, whereas you said you were a little bit confused on how Jam Jam thinks that Carolyn could kind of just definitely get to the end. There was I don't know if you caught it, there was a very small, and we could go back and check, but there was a very small part of last night's episode where Carson says, I think Carson and Jam Jam acknowledge that Carolyn apparently could beat anybody in fire. So I don't know if that's something they're afraid of. I believe Jam Jam said something like she literally practices fire every single day. Yeah, she practiced until her hands bled. That was the quote.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jay, for that. Putting that in the chat. But yeah, that was the quote. So we're getting a lot of fire foreshadowing this season, right? We're getting a lot of foreshadowing in general. And you brought this up, let's not forget Franny basically begging to take a shot at the Tika, not being able to get it done, and then Franny going home, and now the Tika is still sitting here. So clearly there has been foreshadowing that's correct this entire season. And we keep once again yesterday, we saw, I believe it was one of them, but all season we've been seeing Heidi and Carson staring at the fire and like the reflection in their glasses, mostly Carson, but I believe we got it with Heidi a couple times also. So I'm thinking that it could be maybe them two against each other, or at least one of them probably sitting there. I think everybody thinks Carson's going to Fire. So that's my prediction. I don't know about Heidi yet, but
Yeah.
maybe Heidi's making the decision about Fire. Maybe she wins the final immunity and sends Carson. I don't
Mhm.
know. But yeah, the Carolyn thing is certainly something to watch out for. I think I even mentioned on, and I'll let you go in a second. I think I even
Yeah.
mentioned last podcast on Monday. I could see a situation where Carson wins final immunity and then gives it up to go compete in Fire because he knows that in order to maybe take out Carolyn or take out a Jam Jam, he needs to step up and do it. So I could see a lot of different scenarios happening, but I do think that Carolyn, we kind of have heard that she's a big Fire threat. So I think that was the concern there.
Yeah, so I think before we get to the rest of the episode, and also, obviously we're going to spend a good chunk of time looking ahead to next week, the Fire, who takes who. We'll kind of go through our whole final 5 scenarios. But while we're still on tonight's vote, let me quickly ask you, who do you think was like the kingmaker tonight? Because obviously Jam Jam was deciding whether to vote out Jamie or Carolyn. He decides to vote out Jamie. But you see him talking to Carson, and Carson is like, "Look, you're my number one out of the 3 of us, and I want us to kind of vote together." So my question for you is, do you think Jam Jam decided in the end, you know what, I'll stick with Carolyn and Carson, let's vote out Jamie? Or do you think that Carson made the final choice? Jam Jam goes to Carson and says, "Can we do Jamie?" And Carson just says, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it with you tonight." And Jam Jam's like, "Well, I don't want us to vote differently, so I'll vote with you." Like, who do you think made the final decision? Because it's clear that out of the 3 of them in that triangle, Carolyn trusts Carson more than Jam Jam. Jam Jam trusts Carson more than Carolyn. My question is, in confessionals, who does Carson actually trust more? Is it Carolyn because she saved him, or does he trust Jam Jam? So I guess those are my 2 questions to you. Who does Carson trust more? And then who do you think made the final decision last night?
So I think there was no way that Carson was voting Carolyn last night,
Yeah.
but I do think that Jam Jam, I think that he also agreed to. I'm going to say that he made the decision still, even though Carson, I don't think was going to do it. Just because I feel like at least we're getting it from Jam Jam's perspective. I feel like where he's always been the decision maker. How many times this season have we heard him say, "Whoever comes after me goes home"? We've heard it so many times. So it makes me think that he is
hiding in plain sight. Is Jam Jam our winner? Is that our repeated
Yeah,
quote? Is Jam Jam
that's
gonna
what
win?
I'm saying. Is this is a little thing where Stephen Fishback keeps tweeting about this. He's like, that's got to be his argument at Final Tribal Council. You'd think if he gets there, is like everybody that has gone after me goes home. And we keep hearing it from him. So I'm thinking he's the primary decision maker. I'm not really sure if I get that vibe just subconsciously because he's older than Carson, stuff like that. But I think that's what it is. Now yeah. I think that's what it is. And in terms of Carson, who he trusts more, it seems like it's Jam Jam. I don't know, if you're Carson, who would you want to go to the end with more, Carolyn or Jam Jam, or does Carson want to go with? What does he actually want to go with? Both? I don't know.
That's really tough. Granted, we're seeing things differently than him. I guess in his mind, Carolyn for most of the game has been underestimated, and now we're starting to see her as well. We've seen her. They're starting to see her as a player, and he's probably thinking, I can't just bring her and expect a slam dunk. I might have to actually fight against her to get some votes. Meanwhile, I feel like Jam Jam saying to people, if you vote for me, you're gone. And Carson probably sees him playing a very strong game. Even though Jam Jam got votes in the early merge, people obviously really love Jam Jam. They acknowledge he plays a great social game. So I feel like if I was Carson, I would be a little bit more scared of going against Jam Jam. But I would no longer think, okay, if I'm against Carolyn, I got it. I would be thinking it's a little tougher for me to beat Carolyn than I thought.
Yeah, I think the main theme of this episode, and I'm wondering, it's so weird because we see this is honestly, this is a small evolution to the game, but I think players like we never had a player like Carolyn, but players that are as similar as you could be to Carolyn in the past, maybe I'll even throw out the example of a Marianne, right? She was completely underestimated. She made 1 or 2 big moves, and by that point, it was too late before people realized that she was great and stuff. I think that this is the best edited type of character that we've seen that's like in Carolyn's like archetype, if that makes sense. Like we're seeing people say like Carolyn's a huge threat. She could win the game. She, and I think we're getting a lot of like, even though she's an emotional player, she's really actually like really good at the game. We're getting a lot of that, and I like that a lot. I'm of the assumption, and maybe I'm wrong. I feel like Carolyn is going to win if she gets to the end. But I think that Jam Jam will be extremely tough to beat. And I think if Jam Jam's got to go at final 5 if you're Carson and if you're Carolyn, I think. But I also think that low key each Tika member thinks that they could win against any of the other Tika members, which is that's a really interesting dynamic, right? We've had a strong 3. I think Jam Jam thinks he could beat Carolyn, and Jam Jam thinks he could beat Carson. I think Carson thinks he could beat both Jam Jam and Carolyn. And we heard Jamie say something like, "Oh," and obviously she could have easily been just trying to play it up, but she was like, "Well, if you don't want to sit next to Carson at the end, like he could definitely get all the votes there." So it's like not only, I think a lot of people, they have their own like self-confidence that they could beat the others. Mm-hmm. I think that, again, if I had to rank them right now, I'd probably say like Carolyn and Jam Jam are very close, but I think at this point Carson's probably like a clear third, that if they were all 3 sitting there together, then
See, I
think Carson would be a third. I don't know. So here's my, before you get into it, I think the reason for this is like we've historically seen younger players like Carson, who's only 20, I believe, or 19. We have seen them get less respect than a player like a Jam Jam who is 36 or however old he is, or Carolyn, like he's Carolyn I know is, I think, 36, right? I don't know how old Jam Jam is, but
I got it. I'm looking.
How old?
Carolyn is 35.
35.
Jam Jam's 36.
Okay,
and
so
Carson
is.
I
hope I didn't botch their age too bad. Yeah. Okay.
No,
so
you're good.
So right. So I felt like that just generally, a Carson type player has not gotten the respect at the ends. Maybe for a lot of different reasons. Maybe he's different than players in the past, but like we saw it with Xander, and Carson's definitely like a better player than Xander, but also like, I don't know. We've historically seen it's very hard for the 19, 20-year-old to get the votes at the end, especially if he's going against 2 other very good players that he aligned with the entire time. So that I would probably rank Carolyn and Jam Jam neck and neck, and then Carson like a third. But how are you viewing it right now?
So, I mean, it's very tough because on one hand, I agree with you. Like, I agree that I think Carolyn, especially if you asked me this question 2 weeks ago, I would have maybe said Carolyn 3, because I didn't think the jury or the players still in the game were going to respect her really at all. But after her move last week I mean, she didn't save Carson, but she really made a move to save Carson. And then once she opens up this episode explaining, which, I mean, granted, everyone was like, "Why are you saying so much?" But I think other people that have played an idol before, like I think Davey or somebody that had played an idol before, is like, you just get like an adrenaline high after doing that, and like you just can't stop yourself. So she couldn't really slow herself down. But no, she's like, yeah, I got Sarah with a fake idol, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, you're actually really good." So I think now her win equity has gone up in that case because people respect her more. And I do agree with you. I said this before with Xander. I said it before with other young players. When they get to the end, they just don't get the respect sometimes. I think the only difference with Carson here is that he's one of the younger players that we've had, but people still respect him a lot. Like you were saying, oh, Jamie was, like hyping up Carson, like, "Oh, we can't beat him, just give him the check," which she could have just been saying that. But in case you didn't remember, in confessional, so to us, Danny says, like, I mean, granted, this is kind of cheesy, but he's like, if I was up there or a clone of myself against Carson, I might vote for Carson over the clone of myself. So it's like people really do like Carson a lot. Kane, I know, likes Carson a lot. I don't know what Brandon and Matt's relationship with him is, but Carson could definitely get votes. I do feel like Jam Jam, though, with his "if you vote for me, you're gone" argument, might still win the day there. But I feel like people, even though he's young, especially compared to like a Xander, I think people would respect Carson more, though.
Yeah, it is very tough. I don't think he would be like a 0 vote finalist by any means if he went against the other 2 Tika, but I do think that he may struggle to get votes, just because based on past circumstances. But also, you brought up this that I was going to bring this up next. So Carolyn, after her idol play, brings up the whole idol scheme of how she planted the fake idol and how she had the idol the whole time, and everyone was so amazed by it. at first I'm sitting there like, what is she doing? How could you be like yelling about this? Like telling everybody exactly what you did. Like you got to save that for the end. At the same time, though, I think there's an argument to be made that this may not have been the worst move ever. Like I forget who it was. I want to say it was Rick Devens, but
It was Rick Devon. Yeah, I know what
yeah,
you're referring to. It was Rick.
right. He had a tweet that said something like, honestly, like it seems on the surface like when you're watching the episode and it's clear that Carolyn is on the chopping block and maybe the biggest threat now, according to everybody else, it seems like a bad thing to do. But also, you can make an argument that based on what we saw, she's respected a lot more for that story, right? So it's like, if people are knowing that before they even go to tribal council and before they hear a speech, she's already going into the final tribal council if she gets there with a lot of respect. So it's that tough balance of how much of your game do you how much of a silent game could you possibly play while getting the respect? I think that, while she may have gone on a little bit too much about it, I think that it is good that players know kind of what she did, because if she just goes up there in her final tribal council speech and then maybe she doesn't even have the opportunity to throw that in, that she did that at the final tribal council. So I think it's just, you want the players that you're eventually putting up there to have respect for your game. And you can't always do that if you're playing the most silent game. So I do think that, there is a layer of it where you say, okay, it's kind of good that she told that story.
I agree. I mean, I think Rick says it pretty well. And granted, Rick Devens is somebody, granted, EOE was a very different type of season, but he kind of not created, because other people have done it before, but like he really drove home the point of, you're putting on a show in front of the jury. Now, granted, that jury was struggling because they were on EOE, which is terrible. But even for people at Ponderosa, I mean, you're someone like Matt, and Matt's been out of the game now for 9 days. Matt's not going to be seeing the final 3 for another few days. So, like, Matt and Brandon have been out of the game for a long time. Like, for you to entertain the jury like Rick did, like, is really impressive. So for Carolyn to do the idol move, it's already kind of gets people thinking like, oh, wow, Carolyn's pretty good. Then you get people in the game, because if you make it to the end, half those people are going to end up on the jury anyway. You get them start to thinking, okay, Carolyn, we underestimated her. She actually puts on an act and she has a lot of great perspective on the game. You really get them thinking. Granted, your target is going to grow and you have to kind of still escape a couple votes. But if she gets there, I feel like she peaked at a good time where it's like, now people don't have to come. They don't have to come into Final Tribal and say, all right, Carolyn has to change my mind. She's already started to change some minds. So as long as she has a good performance at the end and owns her game and makes a good pitch, she's already done the groundwork. If she didn't do the idol play, if she didn't say all this stuff about the fake idol and her like being smart at the game or whatever, she would have had to come into Final Tribal and really sell herself. And she already is going to be starting behind. Now she's at least caught up to people, if not passing people. So I feel like Rick's saying, it's a bit dangerous, it might seem like, but it may have been needed in some regard.
We'll see. Yeah, I think it is a great point. We'll see what happens if Carolyn gets there to the end. I am so curious to hear what she has to say at Final Tribal Council if she gets there, and I'm so curious to see the reactions of everybody else that is on the jury, because, like, I think it is awesome that they're clearly starting to respect her game, because we've seen it from the very beginning, but I don't think anybody else out there really has, besides like maybe Jam Jam and maybe Carson, and that's kind of it. And even both of them have been like taken aback by her the last couple episodes. So I think it'll be a lot of fun if we do see her get there.
Yeah, I think to answer your question really quickly though, I'm really curious what her argument's going to be. I think she kind of gave you a sneak peek tonight. I mean, she basically, like, when Jeff was saying, she was asking her the question, and she's like, "Oh, is this my goodbye speech?" And he's like, "No, I'm just asking you a question." But she was saying, people see me as emotional, and I own that. Like I'm not gonna sit here and say, "Oh, I'm a fully strategic player," because I know I'm very emotional. But you don't. Again, like we said at the start, like we said as we went through the season, we used to say people are either characters or they're players, and very, very rarely do you have people that are both. But Carolyn is the prime example of both. She's a great character and she's a great player, and you can be both emotional and you can also be strategic. And she is going to own that if she gets to the end and say, people underestimated me. I was not acting goofy and dumb. I am goofy and dumb sometimes, but that's who I am, and I'm able to play a great game even through that. So that's going to probably be her main pitch. My question is, if she gets there with Jam Jam, will that stand up over him saying, like, Matt, you voted for me, you're gone. Josh, you voted for me, you're gone. Brandon, you voted for me, you're gone. Like, what will the jury, again, like I said, each jury has their own rubric. What will this jury respect more is the question.
4-4 vote. Tie Carson decides who wins. I don't know. Heidi decides who wins. I don't know. That would be crazy. But yeah, it'll be interesting. It is two very interesting arguments. I think here's the thing with when I'm putting Carson third. I feel like I haven't heard. We know Carson's story, right? Like we know he's the kid who is a crazy super fan, really smart, rocket scientist who 3D printed and practiced all the puzzles and was able to dominate challenges and is just a really smart kid, really good strategist as well. But like I feel like we haven't heard him articulate his exact game as much as we have heard Carolyn and Jam Jam articulate their games. Maybe I'm missing it, but like we always hear Jam Jam say, "Whoever voted me is going home." And we've been hearing a lot lately of Carolyn talking about her emotional player and how she's been hiding behind her like it's okay to be an emotional player. You could also be emotional and strategic at the same time. Like we've been hearing a lot of both of them say it. I feel like we haven't exactly heard like what would Carson's final pitch be against them. Maybe, and we can maybe hear that at the beginning of the finale next time. But I don't know. What do you think Carson's pitch would be against them?
If I had to guess, I would say Carson's pitch is that he is, I mean, granted, Tika always made the decision. So you have to figure out how do you stand out from the other Tikas, because you can always say, oh, we made decisions together. But Carson's argument will probably be he really has been the person who has been driving a lot of the votes in the game. He has had a lot of agency. Like even if you go back to episode 2, and granted, I think former players have said what you do from merge on counts. Like what you do in the pre-merge doesn't really count. Like I mean, granted, I don't think Russell was ever bringing up that he got Tyson to get himself out, but like the jury cares what happens at merge on. So no one's going to care that Carson got out Helen, but Carson could say, since the beginning of the game, I'm always the kingmaker. I'm always the person who has had the most agency in the game. I was the one who was like, I want to go with Carolyn and Jam Jam instead of Sarah and Helen. I'm the one who took out Franny to basically weaken Carolyn's game and force her to come back to us. I've been tricking Lauren and Jamie for 5 weeks in a row now. They always think they're with me, and I keep blindsiding them and taking out their allies. I took out Heidi's closest ally and Danny. Like I feel like Carson's the one that can say maybe more than Carolyn and Jam Jam. Like, yeah, you voted for me, you're gone. Yeah, I play emotional and strategic, but he might say, I've had the most agency, and I'm essentially the one that's like, everyone trusts me, everyone comes to me with information, and then I end up making the decision that like sends somebody home, basically.
He has it. So yeah, I agree. He has an argument to be made to the jury that he's played the best social game, right? He could say everybody came to me with information. I always knew what was going on. I always knew where the votes were going, and I used that to my advantage. He could say I, got by the twist, got transferred over to switch tribes to Ratu, and I made a great relationship with Kane. I got, he could say something. What Matthew, I believe he had a good relationship with Matthew, and like he knew about Jamie's idol that would end up being fake, but he like was able to get information. He had a good relationship with pretty much everybody on every tribe, and then to the point where he was still able to get information from Ratu people after the merge happened, while still being aligned with Tika. So he was able to basically reconcile his relationship with Jam Jam and Carolyn, run the game that way, but also kind of play undercover and be able to get information from the Ratu, like Kane, and also kind of seemed to be able to get information from everywhere. Like everybody trusted him. Danny, we heard his confessional that he brought up. Like everybody seems to like him. He was able to get Carolyn all the way at the end to play her idol that nobody knew about for him, to save him. And that's a testament to social game as well. So I think I think he could make that argument. But again, we haven't heard him articulate it as much. Is there anything you want to go over still within the episode that we didn't talk about?
Let me look at our notes before we get to the finale. And like looking ahead to everybody, what did we not cover in the episode? I mean, the challenges were pretty straightforward. Let's see. I mean, I think we kind of covered most of everything. Basically, the whole decision of Jam Jam having to decide whether to go with Tika or not. Jamie and Lauren still really feel like they're working with Carson, and Carson in confessionals like I'm duping them. Basically, I mean, I think the last thing I'll say before we move on, like you said earlier, is, I mean, Heidi sounds like she never even considered voting with Jamie and Lauren. Like, that was interesting to me because, I mean, yes, she was debating whether she should play her idol or not, and that was what she was weighing. But it wasn't like we ever heard her say, like in the Jam Jam spot, do I go with the girls and split up Tika in a 3-3 and make them go to Rocks, or do I vote with Tika and hope to sit next to two of them and kind of split their votes? She never said that. And I think it's because like she said to Carolyn, Jamie, and this is why Tika, and I have to say, Shannon Gus said this very perfectly. We keep saying this is Tika season. Tika's been doing great, but I feel like we may not be giving them enough credits for them to play the middle as well as they did, that they really were never in danger at any point. And they got the whole rest of the merge tribe to kind of cave in on each other, because like Heidi didn't even consider, really, from what we saw, voting with Jamie and Lauren. She was like, they wrote my name down last week. I can't trust them. And I'm like, well, Tika's like done all the groundwork. All you have to do is just hope she doesn't play her idol for Jamie. And Heidi was never going to do that because Heidi's gotten votes the last 3 or 4 votes in a row. So she's paranoid enough and she's a bit, self-interested to think, I got to use this for myself. So they really set themselves up very well. So that was the last thing that I think kind of just surprised me, but I just think it speaks more to how great the three of them have played this game.
Yeah, I agree with that. They've been basically masterful with the way that they've navigated everything, and the fact that they're still sitting there, all three of them going into the finale. I mean, when was the last time that we saw a trio like this dominate? Or even honestly, it's even been a while since we've seen a duo roll into the finale like this, right? When was the last? Like even last episode, Jesse and Cody end up breaking up right before the finale, right?
Yeah.
That happens in the penultimate episode.
I would say if you're talking about like a underdog team, now that could be either 2, 3, or 4, because I'm struggling to come up with a 3, but let's just say 2 through 4. Like, who are the best underdog duos, trios, quartets that have ever done it? I think of like Jalapao. So I think of Steven, Taj, and JT. They go against Timbira and they get 3 of themselves to the final 4. So I think of JT and Steven and Taj. I think of Foa Foa with Russell. They basically dismantled Gelu and they go from a 4-12 minority to being 4 of the final 5. And then I think of Tika. So I think those are the 3 examples that I think: Tika, Jalapao, and Foa Foa were those. I mean, granted, Malcolm and Denise, of course, too, was the classic example.
And Dom and Wendell as well, right?
And Dom and Wendell.
Right.
Well, but Dom and Wendell, the difference is like they're a dynamic duo, but they were never in the minority. Like the purple tribe that they were on, I can't remember the name, like Navidi. Dom and Wendell
they
were
just
never
ran the game, right?
They were already in the numbers. Like they got rid of Chris Noble because they had enough numbers. So the point is like people that are like Tika, that they come to the merge at a deficit. I think of Samoa, Tocantins, Philippines in this season as like the 4 prime examples of like underdogs who just like flip the whole game on its head.
Yeah, it was really impressive. And let's not forget, I mean, what they did pinning Ratu, the way that Ratu and Soka were like pinned against each other, and the fact that like they took advantage so much of that to the point where like Heidi's still in the final 6 is not considering voting with Ratu. Like it is unbelievable.
Heidi voted for Danny
right
at one point.
they got him,
and Danny didn't believe, and Danny completely just bought it.
It's unbelievable. Let's get the questions right now, and then, or we could do, let's do power rankings. So like how we see the finale playing out, and then we'll get to questions. All right.
Okay.
All right. I'll go first. So I was clearly completely wrong with my Jam Jam blindside prediction for this week. Jamie ends up going, so now we're left with a final 5 of Jam of the 3 Tika, Lauren, and Heidi. Right. I think that the way the finale goes is I'm still going to stick with my Lauren final 5 boot prediction. And then I'm going to say the final four is the 3 Tika and Heidi. I'm going to say that you know what? I'm going to go bold. I'm going to go bold and say that I'm going to go bold and say Carson wins final immunity. Uh, gives it up to go against Carolyn and Fire. I'm gonna say I have a weird feeling that Jam Jam is just gonna coast because like I feel like the way and it shouldn't be like that, but if you think about it, Heidi and I know that Rob, if you listen to Rob Cesternino and Steven last night, I listened to like 10 minutes of it, but the first 10 minutes, Rob said something that I think is very interesting. He said, I think the big hidden storyline of this season will be Jam Jam and Heidi must have been way closer than we had been led on to, and it makes sense theoretically because why is Heidi always so locked in with them? I don't know. But that couldn't be. It could be a decent theory, and if she were to win final immunity, I could kind of see him being taken and seeing Carson and Carolyn be put into fire. If Carson wins immunity, I could see him trying to boost his resume to take out another Tika and giving up the immunity. He's a big super fan. I think that they've acknowledged that Carolyn's a huge threat in fire, and they've acknowledged that Carolyn's a huge threat in the game. And we know that Carson has basically practiced every single challenge the entire season. So I'm going to predict that somehow Carolyn and Carson, whether it's Carson winning immunity and giving it up or Carson losing immunity and getting put there, I'm going to predict they go against each other, Carson and Carolyn and Fire. Jam Jam and Heidi are at the end. And I'm going to still, based on the stories, I'm going to say Carson loses Fire to Carolyn. Carolyn, Jam Jam versus Heidi. And to be completely honest, I'll stick with my prediction from last week that Carolyn wins, but I think that is going to be a very close vote and intriguing in the final Tribal Council.
So I see it kind of similar, but a little bit differently. And obviously we could be completely wrong. Maybe I've been listening to too much Steven, but I also think Lauren might get fifth place. Now let me put it into a game sense, because I feel like I could just say, oh, we haven't seen her, she's getting the fifth place at it, whatever. Let's say, and this will lead into my argument here, Carson wins Final Five immunity. Then Jam Jam and them are like, all right, do we go for Carolyn again? Carolyn probably says, why don't we go for Lauren in this case? Because you could go for Heidi, because Heidi might be considered a bigger threat. But now Lauren's got 3 votes on the jury, because I feel like Jamie would vote for her, Brandon would definitely vote for her, and I'm going to guess Kane might vote for her. So she has 3 out of 8 votes already. You only need 2 more, or if it's a 4-3-2 vote or 4-3-1 vote, you actually only need 1 more. So they might vote out Lauren actually as a jury threat. We might say, why would you vote out Lauren here? But clearly, I think Lauren has had a good social game. She's the only person left without a vote against her, which is pretty impressive. And I think we just haven't seen her game. So I'll say Lauren maybe gets 5th as a potential jury vote threat. But Carson wins immunity. And by the way, we'll go over this in the questions, because I had jotted this down too. There's a chance that we might see an idol at the final 5, whether it comes from the old camp or from the new camp. But so I don't know how to factor in idols here, but let's just pretend there's nothing. So then at final 4, I think Carson and Heidi are going to make fire. I feel like, the reason why I said Carson will win immunity here is because I think Jam Jam could win final immunity. So you would think, oh, he wants to send Carolyn into fire. But I'm wondering, as Carson has won more and more challenges now, and maybe Carson comes up close behind Jam Jam in this final challenge, does Jam Jam finally see, I don't want to go against Carson, let me take Carolyn? Because kind of like with I can't remember who did this in 41, 42, 43, but it's like, if I take somebody, it'll make them look like Alexander took Erica, because he's like, oh, it'll make Erica look weaker because I took her and she was brought to the end, and everyone's like, you idiot, you brought Erica. So I feel like Carson might get put into fire because he's seen as a threat by Jam Jam. Jam Jam brings Carolyn to make Carolyn look weaker because he brought her to the end. Heidi, I agree with you. Heidi beats Carson. Carson loses fire. So our 4 and 5 are the same. And then I would like Carolyn to win, but I'm going to predict Jam Jam's going to win. So we have a similar path, but kind of different.
I could see that. Yeah, I think the main prediction is we have the same final three. I think that the votes are going to come down to Carolyn versus Jam Jam in the final in the top two places. So, all right, similar there. Let's get to questions. So we have a question from Brittany to open it up here. She wants to know, Jeff said publicly a few years ago they would never hide an idol at Tribal. Do you think he'll change his mind?
I'll say no. I mean, granted, Jeff has changed his mind at times, but we've also seen Jeff on this podcast when he has an idea, whether he likes or hates something, he kind of sticks with it. I'm gonna say we'll never see an idol at Tribal.
I could see him changing his mind, but the fact that there wasn't in the first 4 seasons after Adam tried that is definitely discouraging for people who want it to happen. So,
speaking of twists, can I bring up one quick thing before we get back to questions?
yeah.
And I want to know if you agree with me and people in the chat agree with me. I cannot think of a twist or a game mechanic that I think is so boring and inconsequential as the final 5 go to a new camp. I think it is so boring. I don't understand why Jeff thinks it's so cool because they have to earn it, start over with 2 days left. Jeff, if they're bringing their stuff to Tribal because they know it's coming, it's not a good twist. Like, I don't know what he sees. I don't know what he sees in this twist. The only logical thing that I can think of, and actually Ricard brought this up and actually makes a little bit of sense. Do you think it's a cheeky way of production saying, get out of camp so we can either clean up camp or we can prep it for the next season? Because I, for the life of me, can't think of why Jeff wants them to go to a new beach, all for the purposes of you're going to earn it for your last 2 days. You've been giving them no food for 24 days. What makes Dylan, is this the most pointless twist they've ever had? I don't see anything that matters with this at all.
The only time I thought it was like kind of like brought things together was, and again, I never thought I'd bring up this season ever again, but Islands of the Idols were like they lived on Islands of the Idols like in the last 5. It made sense. Like
that's different. Yeah,
it made like sense. This is just like going to a new beach. Like, yeah, it's boring. And they know what's happening. They bring everything to Tribal.
Like, you know what the sad part is? You would think Jeff would say, "Oh, they've caught on to this. I need to change it up." On his podcast, he's like, "I like it. We're going to keep it going." I'm like, Jeff. Listen, I love Jeff, but sometimes Jeff just can't get out of his own way. Honestly.
Yeah. All right. So Jay wants to know: do we know if Carolyn told Jam Jam that she had the idol? I'm not sure. Do you guys know? I think that it was clear that I think it was made clear by her that she never told anyone except for Carson, right? Is that correct?
From what we saw, nobody knew except for Carson like 10 minutes beforehand. Yeah.
Right. This is a good question. He says, Jay says Carson has to be the best player when speaking of their play. When speaking of players in their early 20s that Survivor has ever had. Thoughts? Oh. You know who Carson reminds me of, kind of? I don't know how old he was when he.
That's the problem. Like I could think of young people, but the age I can't think of the age.
I don't know how old he was, but I believe he was in college at the time. But when Spencer season 28, when he debuted, I don't know if he was in grad school or out of college. I don't know how old he was on that season, but I want to say he had to be probably early 20s, right? Or was he a little bit older than that?
I mean, Spencer was young. I'll look it up. I would guess maybe he was 24. I'm gonna look.
Spencer.
He was 21. Okay, so that's a fair comparison. 21.
Yeah. For me, that's always been I've always saw them as similar for some reason. Like this entire season, I'm like he's like the new era Spencer, but I don't know. I would say, is Carson one of the best players in the early 20s? For sure. I think the fact that he's getting this much respect from everybody else, at least seemingly, is very impressive. And I've mentioned that in the past. We haven't really seen that. So the fact that even if he were to get to final tribal council and not get the votes to win, the fact that he clearly is respected out there, and that is very impressive.
Yeah, people in the chat are saying Todd. Obviously, I didn't remember how old Todd was, but Todd obviously is an amazing winner. And if he was in his early 20s, then yeah, Todd is a perfect example of someone who was a young player in Survivor, but did extremely well with their cast. Somebody else that I think of that was extremely young was Victoria in Edge of Extinction. And I mean, she was somebody who I feel like played a really good game, probably underrated. And the only reason that she got voted out in like 5th place or 6th place is because Chris came back from EOE and he's like, oh yeah, the whole jury would vote for Victoria if she was there. And she's like like what the hell? So more reasons why we can complain about EOE. But basically, and also, I mean, also from EOE, Gavin was only 23 as well. So it's like, no, there are a bunch of young players that are 25 and younger that crushed it. Again, the age just messes me up with how old people are. But, and again, Xander was good too. The problem with Xander was that, people just didn't respect his game or thought he was, not the most genuine. But, there's a lot of great young players in Survivor. It's just like the problem is sometimes you get there and they don't want to vote for you.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think Todd is a good one. And you had a few other good ones as well. Let me see. This is a good question.
Well, I mean, actually, recently, Marianne was like, I think 24, 25. So she also was like really young.
A good point. It's a good point. So Jay wants to know, who do you guys think the current jurors will end up rooting for and pitching for at Ponderosa? It's tough, right? It completely depends who's sitting there, right? Like, I think that you said, like, Lauren may, even though we're not seeing her, she may end up right now being a jury threat in the fact that, like, she could maybe get some Ratu votes. So I think that, like, she won't get there, but I think that, like, Ratu is probably pulling for her. And then at the same time, I think, like, it's been made pretty clear that I would think that Franny is like is a big Carolyn fan. So I'm going to say that she's going to be a big advocate for Carolyn if she gets there. And I'm assuming her and Matt may vote together. We've heard that Danny is a big Carson fan. So I think it could go a bunch of different ways with that, but that's off the top of my mind, what I'm thinking immediately.
Yeah. So if Matt and Franny vote together, assuming they do, because they clearly are very close at Ponderosa and they're close to this day, I think they would vote together probably. So you could think Carolyn will get Franny's vote if she's there, probably Matt's. I think Brandon and Jamie, I would say, are locked in votes for Lauren. If Lauren's not there, I don't think Brandon would vote for Carolyn. I also don't think Danny would vote for Carolyn, so I'm not sure who they would vote for. But Lauren gets those 2 votes. Carolyn gets Franny and Matt. Kane, I could see voting for Lauren, but I don't know if maybe Kane would vote for Carson in that case. I'm not sure who Kane would vote for. I guess Danny would vote for Heidi if she was there, but I don't know if Heidi will get there, but maybe Danny would vote for her. And then I don't know if I covered everybody, but yeah, I think that's who the current jury would vote for. I think Jam Jam is somebody who, like, Lauren has, I think, a guaranteed vote or 2. Carolyn has a guaranteed vote or 2. Carson and Heidi and Jam Jam, other than maybe Danny for Heidi, I don't see either of them having like a guaranteed vote on the jury, but they could get votes based on who's there, if that makes sense.
Yep, for sure. Sorry, I was just going through questions here. Let me see. This is something that I've been seeing thrown around as a theory. Jay wants to know, why would they put in a pointless idol search in an episode that went nowhere and easily could have been left in the cutting room floor? Maybe we get a flashback to somebody who actually found the idol. So I saw some people theorizing that maybe Heidi found the idol and she had 2, which is why she just played it for herself. To me, that's only a... To me, that would almost make her look worse to me, because it's like,
really?
if she had found the other idol, then to me there's less of an excuse to not go for a big move in that situation because you have insurance. So it's like you could play one on yourself and one on somebody else to make sure that you ensure that happens. Whatever you want to happen happens. That's probably honestly one of the reasons why I don't think that happens. It's because that it would be too logical for her to completely control the vote. Whereas, she could easily just, I guess, if she's holding it just to close to the final 4, it's impressive that she found the idols, but the actual reasoning behind her gameplay would not make much sense, in my opinion, at all.
But I saw that same theory, and I did think it was very weird. Like, why would they show that and then nothing came of it? But because it's tough, because I feel like, yeah, there's a good chance that we start off next episode and we flash back to Heidi finding it. But then if they hide a brand new idol at the new beach because it's the final 5, Heidi played her, so it can go back into recirculation. I mean, could we have 2 idols at the final 5? It's possible. I feel like that's kind of weird, but it could easily happen. And Dylan, I mean, I feel like you bring up a good point where it's like, why would she just not make that move there if she already has one in her back pocket? I feel like Heidi just is somebody who is a very, self-interested player. And she has every reason to be nervous because she's gotten votes the last 3 tribals in a row. And listen, I've said before, Occam's razor is like usually means the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. It could just be she found an idol at the old camp. She actually had the other one from before. She says, no matter what, I am guaranteed Final Four. If I play one tonight, I play one tomorrow. Because the problem is, if she plays 2, like you just said, if she's really scared, you play one for Jamie, you play one for yourself. If she pulls a Parvati and pulls out 2 idols at once, you get people saying in the Final 5 in the new era, you make a big move, you're gone. Heidi would be dead in the water at Final 5, I feel like, in that case. So I don't know if I believe the theory, but it does make some sense to me.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, yeah, I'm also thinking about it from our perspective, where I feel like she needs to make a big move in order to win, whereas maybe she doesn't realize that clearly as much right now. All righty. I think I like this question a lot from Jay. This I've seen it talked about a lot, which is why I bring it up. He wants to know: do you guys think Jamie got a weird edit for a 6th place finisher? Yes, yeah, I do. Like, how many times did I talk about in this podcast this season that she was gonna have some crazy exit, and her exit ended up being just like, well, it was maybe gonna be Carolyn, and now Jamie goes. It was a pretty simple vote. Like, I don't know. It was like, why did she get the dodo edit all season to go out pretty normally? I don't know. It is weird.
I mean, it's tough because I feel like, you and I have gotten so good at looking at the edit over the last several seasons. I think obviously you and I started this journey together, back in season 40, but obviously we've seen all the other seasons and we've kind of gotten used to what the like edits look like. But I think the new era has really shown us that we can't really predict things anymore because, if you had told us heading into 41 how the last 3 seasons would turn out, we would not have. I would not have believed it at all. So I feel like, to answer Jay's question, it obviously, I think based on precedent, it was a very weird edit. But I'm almost wondering if I should, do what Steven's saying, and is like, I should probably just stop talking about the edit now because it's starting to just become unreadable at this point. Because like you said, I've thought for weeks now, ever since the whole like Jamie Idol thing happened, she was going to be a losing finalist. Clearly that was wrong. And I actually thought even tonight, if Tika wanted to split up Ratu, I was like, oh, you get out Lauren here. And they're like, no, let's go for Jamie. I'm like, okay. So yeah, it's a weird edit for sure, but maybe edits. Jamie says alliances are dead. Maybe edits are dead.
Edits are dead. Edits are dead. I like that theory. All right, and then we have a question from Christian here, and we touched on this a little bit, but he thinks that there's a possibility that we get tie votes in the finals like Ghost Island. What are our thoughts on that? So is it confirmed eight on the jury, or is it 9 on the jury? It's 8.
Yeah, you're gonna have Matt, Brandon. You're gonna have 8. You're gonna have Matt, Brandon, Kane, Franny, Danny, Jamie, and then 2 more people.
Okay. Yeah, I think it is possible that the tie vote. Now, what if we had a tie vote with all 3 Tika sitting there, and then the other Tika had to choose between one of the other 2? That would be a crazy ending to that arc. But yeah, I think that like a 4 vote with Heidi sitting there and not getting any, or Lauren sitting there and not getting any, is for sure a possibility. Like, I could easily see that.
There's a chance. And maybe you'll be right. I still feel like the odds are just so low. Granted, for the longest time, Survivor used to have odd number juries, but even in the last several seasons, I think ever since maybe Co Wrong, or maybe maybe not Co Wrong, but definitely ever since Triple H, we've had 8-person juries. Not counting EOE seasons. So production clearly wants a tie. They got it in Ghost Island. I just feel like the odds are so tough because to have the jury split 4-4 is tough. Dylan, I also feel like another theory why this might be why it's tough is because now that we've had 8-9 seasons of this jury roundtable format rather than questions. Granted, Dom and Wendell tied in a roundtable season, but it's now that the jury can come in kind of more aligned, I feel like it's very hard for the jury to be split in half. It's not a coincidence to me that Erica, Gabler, and Marianne, they all won by a 7-1-0 vote. Like, that's, I think, a little weird that they all won by the same exact votes. But I just feel like the jury now is coming into a point where they're going to be mostly on the same page.
That's a big thing, I think, as well. Like that, it's tough to tie a vote when all the jury comes in, maybe, aligned, and this person needs to do this to get our vote. This person needs to do this in order to get our vote. We're voting for this person if they do this, and everyone kind of comes in a line. At least that's what we've seen in the new era. So I think that's the biggest hurdle to it happening.
Yeah.
But all right, that is all we got for tonight. Reminder that if you're watching this video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. The like really helps us out, so that, would thank you in advance if you guys could do that who are watching. And yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in once again. And we will be back here next week to recap the finale of another Survivor season.
Dylan, it always goes so fast.
It always goes so fast.
And then we got to wait, 4 months until the next season. But maybe we'll have some stuff to talk about in the off season. So.
Yeah, we can figure that out when the time comes. But
yeah, stay tuned to our Twitter to see when we go live next week for the finale. And otherwise, we will see you then for the end of 44. Grab your torches and head back to camp.
Good night.